I'm John Trowbridge, historian with the Kentucky National Guard. This year marks the 50th anniversary of the establishment and the development of the Western Kentucky Training Site, which is now known as Wendell H. Ford Regional Training Center. In early September 2019, an oral history interview was conducted with three of the principal individuals who were involved in the establishment and the development of the site. We had Brigadier General Scott Campbell, Chief Warrant Officer 5 retired Joe Wilkins, and State Command Sergeant Major retired Greg Armstrong. Presented here in their words is the story of the development of the center.
Peabody didn't have an execution plan for the bulk acreage that they were going to, surplus acres that they were going to hold as their mining progress developed. It ended up they would have thousands of acres of mining lands in what we called spoil lands. And it wasn't until the late 80s or early 90s that Peabody realized they had a glut of surface mine lands that they wanted to find a beneficial use. Over the life of the mine of the Peabody Coal Company, River Queen surface and underground mine, there was approximately 200 million tons of coal shipped out on that rail line. So today we have about 2 miles of siding plus the spur off the Paducah and Louisville Railroad that we could still utilize to bring in and take out military equipment.
Initially on the site, it was primarily the used strip mine area, abandoned lands, and what was known as the River Queen building or facility that the Peabody Coal Company owned at the time.
I actually came to work at the Wendell Ford Center at the weekend training site, the Utes. I left Peabody Coal Company in 1987. We were starting to gain support. We were starting to become a discussed topic in the community of what training is going on. Peabody started to downsize a bit at the decline of the surface coal production in the late 80s and early 90s. And it was an opportunity at that time. We kind of shift the paradigm to the growth at that time of the training site. And I don't think we were just a small footprint in the county, and I think over the last 20 years those roles have changed substantially. We were staged in phases, and we would have to get one hallmark to another hallmark to the different hallmarks. That was based on our throughput and our troop strength, what could we sustain, what could we support. National Guard Bureau set out the training centers based on size, based on acreage, and we started out as a weekend training site, which was mostly your collective task, to the point of a MTC light, Major Training Area Light, is strictly based on capability, maneuver space, and housing. So those were hallmarks that we tried to achieve, and I will say that we did discuss this with Peabody's upper management as they were continuing to cease some of their surface operations in this area. And they realized that some of the impacts that they could help with was the land expansion for us that would let us get over the certain threshold of acres that we could be recognized as a major training area light. That was a huge obstacle that we did finally achieve. So it took all the organizations and the Guard and our staff to work that.
The reason for the development of the Western Kentucky training site was the fact that the Kentucky Guard realized that they needed to have a large maneuver area, training area for the armor elements of the Kentucky National Guard at the time.
The fact that we had the two tank battalions, all from Western Kentucky. We were doing more than just trying to train two tank battalions in Kentucky.
Right.
That's when you started looking out.
Right.
And it evolved to eventually where we had several thousand troops in Fort Knox. We had 2,000 troops in here from Fort Campbell in the Mega Gold exercise. The intent here was to give them a place to get sufficient training without having to go to Fort Knox, which is what they thought they had to do. And in probably late '69, they put a maintenance tent up in the compound and moved the tanks over across the road and into the compound. And
now, when we're talking tanks, we're talking about the 48s at that time?
They were 48 A1s, I think, at the time.
Okay.
And
Because I think we maxed out with the A3s.
and then we went to A3s, and then we eventually got the M1s and some M1A1s. So it just transitioned over the years. But it cut their trips to Fort Knox down to annual training. Right. And
yeah, that was a big thing.
Yeah, it gave us mounted maneuver space, and that's primarily what we did. The Wendell Ford had not progressed to the point where we could do any kind of dry fire gunnery. We would do our tank gunnery at Knox, and we would do mounted maneuver here. Ironically, Knox being the home of armor, there was not a whole lot of room to do mounted maneuver.
Right.
The Army was going to divest a lot of heavy armor in the Guard. So 04, 05, can't recall exactly when we stood down the 149th Armored Brigade and transitioned it originally to a IBCT and then eventually to a MEB. So the focus went from the Cold War focus on major combat operations to now global war on terrorism, which was a focus on stability ops and counterinsurgency. So we needed to adapt Wendell Ford for this new reality. And that led us to a lot of good work done. Troop labor, facility staff, the staff here to build forward operating bases, identify and improve MSRs, detention facilities, villages. The whole CQM program grew out of that, the close quarters marksmanship, convoy gunnery, stuff we didn't do before.
Right.
Mounted moving gunnery from wheeled vehicles. I mean, that was all new to us.
You know, we probably well over $100 million spent, and you know, we have over 200 buildings of various types on this facility. The terrain suited the European terrain.
It did.
And while in the early days we enjoyed being able to come from our units in Western Kentucky with our armor and train here, we had rolling terrain from the mining, surface mining reclamation that left it in various degrees of percentage of spoil peaks, and most of them were not to exceed 12%. But the rolling terrain that we trained on here was very similar to the area where the East would meet the West in Europe in the Fulda Gap area.
We're working on adding a multi-purpose machine gun range.
Yes, sir.
Now, that's still in development, but it looks good. And the Wendell Ford staff feel like that's the missing piece that we're lacking right now. That's still, with it, you know, units are not gonna have to go to Knox to qualify with their machine guns.
Another unique element to the facilities is the National Emergency Responders Training Facility.
I was gone from down here at the time, but was working in Frankfurt, and working with the fire commissioners in Frankfurt. We got property for them, or allowed them to come down here and construct a fire training center. Part of the agreement was that they could train military firefighters, and they could bring them in from the Army, Navy, Air Force, whoever, and train them on site. And that developed from just a fire training center to a disaster training center also.
We have been able to bring military firefighters in from multiple states to get the certifications that they can't get anywhere else. We can house them, provide the training, provide the commissioning that they need to stay current on their certified requirements. And it's been an amazing partnership. And not only do we train our military firefighters, we train our state and federal firefighters from different organizations here. And it has been one of the best partnerships that we've developed in probably 15, 20 years.
So in the evolution of the Wendell H. Ford, as we were discussing earlier, training has shifted over the years, and this is a great example of one such change. What you see behind me is a rubble pile, and it's not just a pile of rubble. It is constructed to replicate a disaster, potentially say something like in the wake of an earthquake. And what we do here is we train search and extraction teams, and so mannequins will be buried inside this rubble pile, and so the search and extraction teams have to cut their way through and place bracing and rigging in such a way that they can get to the mannequin and extract it and do it in a safe manner. This is just one example of how the training site continues to evolve.
I think that a lot of that, in honesty, General Youngman was a visionary, but he was probably very, very keen on what we were going to need to train our Kentucky soldiers.
Literally transformational leader for us.
Absolutely.
As it relates, particularly as it relates to this facility.
We have to remain fluid, the training site, as it has been for 20 plus years. Realize what conflict, what mission, how quick we can adapt to that. And that's been the key to the successes of Wendell Ford for the last 20 plus years, is how quick that we can adapt and adjust to the war fight or the theater where our soldiers are going.